Let's discuss some comments. These comments all come from a video I did analyzing an argument in a YouTube short put out by the Daily Dose of Wisdom, which is created by Brandon McGuire. In that short, he claimed to offer an annihilation of an atheist argument. I analyzed that video and showed that the atheist argument was not annihilated, was in fact left completely unchallenged and untouched. As always, I invited people to comment and said if I had the time, I would answer any that seemed remotely reasonable. So here's what I'm doing. I'm going to put the comments on the screen, but I'm not going to read all of them because some of them are a little long. If you want to read the whole thing, pause it, read the whole thing. And if I'm unfair to any of them, let me know. This first comment is critical of my substituting Parsons' 100 times bigger than Mount Everest Michelangeloid figure with Jason Momoa, or I think I said giant Jason Momoa, because they claimed it minimized the argument by subtly undermining the force of the argument by being silly and detaching the appearance of Jesus from the body of religious knowledge connected to him. There are three parts to my response. One, I'm not going to use a word like Michelangeloid unless I absolutely have to. Sounds like a word that's unnecessarily heightened language that people use to try to sound smart. I don't care about sounding smart. I want to be smart. Two, I don't think it undermines the substitution of Jesus because the image that Michelangelo was presenting was of God. Now, there is an argument to be made that any instantiation of God on earth will have to look like Jesus, but I don't think Michelangelo committed to that idea. And the God of Michelangelo's creation of Adam is an elderly dude with a long beard who's yoked. And it struck me in the moment that he looked like an elderly Jason Momoa. It may have been a little silly, but it's irrelevant to the argument. And I may have turned some people off with a sort of silly substitution instance, but I'm not too worried about that because I'm genuinely trying my best to make principles of logic, really good philosophy, accessible to as many people as I can. If you're turned off from really objectively and thoughtfully analyzing an argument because I replaced a Michelangeloid figure 100 times bigger than Mount Everest with giant Jason Momoa, then you really ought to work on restraining your emotional responses because it didn't impact the argument logically. And maybe you're missing something really important if you let your emotions get in the way like that. If that's really going to be that off-putting to you when it's completely irrelevant to the argument, then maybe that's a case of like, oh man, maybe I should work on that. Hopefully that helps. Comment number 2, multiple attestation is sufficient evidence for supernatural claims, which is the point Craig makes in the same clip you've given. Sufficient to whom? And on what grounds? Because there are plenty of people in this world who consistently hold they will not believe anything purely and solely on the testimony of other people. And that's a totally rational position to hold. There have been lots and lots of cases of far more than 500 people testifying to experiencing something and them all having been wrong. So, no, multiple attestation is not sufficient evidence for supernatural claims for a whole bunch of different reasons, none of which have really satisfactorily been addressed by Dr. Craig or anyone else that I've found online. But it is a topic that's going to be touched on in the next video that I do, so hopefully you'll watch. Next comment, you don't have an ounce of skepticism in your heart. You believe without evidence God isn't real. You have more faith in your unproven claim with more faith than any Christian ever had. I'm guessing you were put off by what you thought my video was going to be about, but the only thing I talked about in the video was an argument against an atheist argument. That was it. I didn't say anything about my beliefs, and I didn't argue for or against the existence of God. All I showed was that William Lane Craig's argument, attempting to demonstrate a contradiction in Parsons' position, that argument fails. That's it. I do have an ounce of skepticism in my heart, more than an ounce, and it's philosophical skepticism. I will question all beliefs, my own included, regularly, all the time, because my goal is to have the best beliefs I possibly can, have really good evidence and justification and reasons for those beliefs. I want to know the best reasons to believe that God exists or not. So I hope that helps. If you were so turned off by what you thought the video was going to be about, you didn't realize what it was about, give it a watch again and let me know if you have any comments. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the argument I actually gave. Next comment. There is no atheist argument. There is a faith argument. Stop trying to disprove atheism and prove theism. That's the only way to disprove atheism. I think that's targeting the argument that I was critiquing and not me. There is an important philosophical precedent for what's being said here, that the burden of proof is on the theist to prove the existence of something, not for someone to find empirical evidence of the non-existence of something. It's an important topic, and if people are interested, I can examine it. I'm guessing there's more than a few folks who've done videos on like Russell's teapot, and I don't know how good any of them are, but that's a sort of example that philosophical example that's consistent with this comment. Thanks for the comment. The next few comments are really reflective of arguments consistent with or made by David Hume, and that's going to be a topic of one of my next videos as well. So if they interest you, keep an eye out for that video. The first is basically says, hey, look, if I saw the giant Jason Momoa or the giant Michelangeloid figure, I think it would be just as likely that it was an alien with some sort of technology that was able to create a hologram that we all believed we saw. Wouldn't that be a totally rational inference? And the answer to that for many people would be yes. It would be just as likely to infer really smart aliens as it would be to infer God. The person goes on to say that if they had an idea about what would convince them of God's existence, they would keep it to themselves, because if the all-good, all-knowing, all-powerful God came to earth and really wanted to convince this person, they'd have the secret code. They'd know. And it makes sense. There are lots of arguments that people are going to make as to saying how and why God can't go out of his way to convince you of his existence, and some of those make sense too. But I like the idea. It's like the opposite of Pascal's wager. Rather than believing in God just in case he does exist, you're going to say, I'm going to keep my belief to myself until he shows up and proves it to me. I'm going to focus on a portion of the next comment because it really illustrates the sort of philosophical skepticism that I have in my heart. Taking the word of a person who read a book, or reading that book yourself, and assuming that the book is from the time it's said to be from, assuming the people who are said to have written it, wrote it, assuming that those people existed, assuming they were genuine in their accounts, and assuming that through all that, the context was interpreted correctly to the actual intention of those written words. Now, people will have some pretty good answers to many of those questions. There is historical evidence for some of those things. But the spirit of the questioning, that's what we're about. We want to question all evidence, whether it's for something we believe or we find totally insane. And we want to question them both equally because we want to find the truth. So asking the question of, is this book credible? Is the person who wrote it credible? Is the translation credible? How do I know that the person wasn't lying? Why isn't it more likely that they were lying or making it up or confused or deluded or writing allegorically or metaphorically or poetically? How do I know which part to take as a poem and which part to take literally? Am I sure that it was even intended to be historically accurate? All of those are questions you want to ask about any book, any testimony. And when the testimony involved, when the book involved, impacts the lives of millions and millions of people and influences the moral and political decisions they're making every day, you probably want to question that stuff pretty seriously. So that captured quite a bit of the sort of philosophical skepticism I'm talking about. The next comment serves as a really awesome segue into my next video. So if these questions interest you, you might want to watch it. The first comment is basically saying, hey, look, we don't have testimony of 500 people. We have testimony of one person claiming that 500 people all had an identical experience when they witnessed Christ appearing to them all at the same time. That's an important point. There is a meaningful difference between having 500 people independently come to you and report something versus one person coming to you and saying, oh yeah, 500 people believe it. The second part of the comment points out a couple of things that are really important. One, they point out that nobody has properly defined evidence, including me. And they are right. I didn't. Mostly because it would have taken a really, really long time. And it's a pretty complicated definition if you're going to do it well and do it completely. This person defines evidence as empirical. And they make a distinction between purely logical arguments and empirical arguments. I'm guessing this person has read Hume, because that's really similar to a distinction Hume's going to make. The comment goes on, and I'll paraphrase. How does purely physical empirical evidence, evidence that comes from our senses, about the physical world, the external world out there, physical world that we assume exists, how are we going to get from evidence that's natural and we look at and see and act as if it behaves consistently, and we have these laws that either were revealed to us or we constructed to explain it, laws that really accurately and consistently explain the behavior of middle-sized physical objects, right? When we get really, really small or really, really big, things go a little wonky, but we know what's going to happen every single time, pretty much. If I lift up my pen and I drop it, we can say, damn, that's going to fall at 9.8 meters per second per second. Why? Because we can test it and we've seen it. And we've come up with these rules and laws that have to do with space and time and acceleration and inertia and gravity, all of which apply to a physical world and come from evidence of a physical world. How do you use that sort of evidence, physical evidence, that behave in these predictable ways in order to infer the existence of something that follows none of those rules? By definition, it's timeless. It exists outside of space and time. It's not going to follow those same rules. The question this commenter is asking is, what the hell could I know about something like that? What could I, a flawed human, know about a God that exists outside of space and time, which seem to be the minimum requirements of me making sense of any of this stuff? It's a really important question. And it's a question that I'm going to have to table and Hume's going to have to try to tackle next time. I really appreciate all of the comments, and especially those people who are willing to challenge their own beliefs a little bit. If you want to get closer to the truth, subscribe. And if you have specific questions, comments, or topics that have to do with anything philosophical, if I think I can add something to the discussion or help you understand it better, I will. For now, it seems like we're going to do some philosophy of religion because damn are people interested in it. Thank you again for the time.